Did you ever wonder how a glider can stay aloft for hours? And without the aid of an engine, how it can reach altitudes that are so high you need oxygen?
Or how the curved surface of a wing creates lift.
For the answers to these questions and more, stay tuned to this episode of Did You Ever Wonder?
If you ever wondered what it would be like to soar through the air in a glider, we have some answers for you today.
No, you'll have some answers for them, Rex, because you're the pilot. Me, I'm just along for the ride.
Now, come on, Mark. You know all about flying. After all, you were the pilot of Jupiter 2 when you were Don West on Lost in Space.
Oh, that's true. But you see, Rex, that was make-believe. I mean, it wasn't real. No, today you're the adventurer, and I have the luxury of learning all about gliding from the ground.
From the ground. Well, that's where it all starts, on the ground at the New England Glider Port. The glider, or sailplane as we call them, has everything that a powered aircraft would have except for, naturally, an engine, which you can hear in the background. Now, it has a wing, also has a fuselage, down here a vertical stabilizer, and a rudder. Now the rudder, a lot of people think would steer the airplane or glider around, but it doesn't. The thing that makes a glider turn is a bank, and the rudder just takes care of the slip that would occur if they didn't use that rudder just to correct that slip through the air. It has a horizontal stabilizer and this flap in back, which is called an elevator. Now the elevator, when it is pushed up with the controls, will force the tail down and the nose up. And conversely, when it's pushed down, the nose goes down and the tail comes up. Now come on up here, I just want to show you something that the ordinary aircraft does not have. And that's what is known as spoilers. The powered airplane doesn't need these. However, it's important when you have the field made. In other words, when you know you're going to be able to land, you're going to be high and fast, and it's necessary for you to get down fast. And so by putting on the spoilers, they're called spoilers because it actually spoils the airflow over and under the wing and spoils that lift. So you come down like an elevator and you can come down very rapidly. The controls are quite simple. The control stick has two functions. Pulling back activates the elevator, which brings the nose of the glider up. Pushing forward will lower the nose. Moving the control stick to the left or right activates the ailerons, which will put the aircraft into a left or right bank, which gives us directional control. Now the panel is quite simple. This is the altimeter, which indicates our altitude, the compass, which indicates our direction. This is the variometer, indicating whether we're gaining or losing altitude. This is the airspeed indicator. The red knob releases the tow rope. The foot pedals control the rudder. Our tow plane pilot today is Jerry LaMontagne. During his 23 years here at New England Glider Port, he holds the world's record for the greatest number of tows as a tow plane pilot and the greatest number of takeoffs and landings, more than any pilot in the world, better than 40,000.
I was inspired by Lindbergh when he landed in Paris. That made me decide to start flying. I've been flying ever since. I've flown all type of airplanes, air-cooled, water-cooled, biplanes, a lot of open jobs, a lot different from the modern airplane of today. I do a lot of towing. Sometimes we do as much as 60, 70, or 80 tows a day on a good Saturday or Sunday when the weather is good. We use a Cessna L-19. Those planes were used during the war for reconnaissance plane. The Civil Air Patrol have used them for years. We keep them in good shape and they run just as good today as when they were new. We keep flying them.
While our ground crew prepares our sailplane for takeoff, Yvonne will tell you about how our glider was manufactured.
Today's high-performance gliders are manufactured using technologically advanced materials, such as graphite composites. The glider that you see Rex flying was manufactured at the Schweitzer Aircraft Company, utilizing more traditional manufacturing methods. A combination of aluminum, fiberglass, and painstaking craftsmanship, along with superior engineering, make this one of the highest quality gliders of its type. The pleasures of the spectacular sport of sailplaning are available to just about everyone. Previous flying experience isn't required, and young glider pilots can solo as early as 14 years old. Organizations like the Soaring Society of America can familiarize you with the Federal Aviation Administration's written and flying exams, which qualify you for a private glider pilot's license. Rex had the opportunity to visit the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where Professor John Hansman demonstrated the principles of lift.
In the wind tunnel here at MIT, Professor Hansman's going to show us the action of the air going over the airfoil using the smoke generator.
Well, we have another small airfoil model here, Rex, and I'm going to put it up in the smoke. And you can see the air flowing over the top and bottom of the airfoil in the smoke. And right now I'm at zero angle of attack, so the airfoil is not generating any lift. As I start to lift up the nose of the airfoil, you'll now see that the smoke over the top effectively stretches over the top of the airfoil, and I'm starting to generate lift with the airfoil.
Okay, so actually you're creating vacuum over the top and it's pushing up from the bottom as well.
That's right. Now as I increase the angle of attack, the lift increases, so I get more and more lift, until a point where the air can no longer make it over the top of the airfoil easily, and you'll see there's now turbulence behind the airfoil. This is what we call an airfoil stall or aerodynamic stall.
Okay, now it's actually, there's no smoke over that section right there, which shows that there is no lift being generated.
That's right, very little lift is being generated by the airfoil. And we actually design gliders so that when this happens, the gliders are a little bit nose heavy, and the nose will tend to fall down and the airfoil will start flying again.
When we come back, Rex will be towed to his release altitude, and Mark will take us back in time to look at the history of early flight.
Well, we're about ready for our takeoff. The 200-foot polypropylene tow rope is attached to a quick-release hook under the nose of our glider. Before every flight, the rope is inspected for defects and fatigue. The tow plane takes up the slack, and wagging the rudder will signal the tow plane pilot that we're ready for takeoff. Here we go. We don't want to be too anxious to get into the air here. We let the speed build up, and the glider actually flies itself off the ground. As soon as we see the tow plane take off, we put the nose of the glider down. That takes some of the stress off the tow rope and actually helps the tow plane climb out. It's important we stay right behind the tow plane. We visually split the tow plane fuselage with the vertical stabilizer and keep the horizontal stabilizer even with the landing gear. The early gliders were launched by manpower. Today, most gliders use an airplane tow, but some are launched by a winch, others are towed by automobile. The advantage to an airplane tow is that you can choose your altitude. We're up to 1,500 feet now. There's a little bit of thermal activity there. That looks promising. May get a bit bumpy here for a while. What I'm looking for is a ground reference so we can go back and find those thermals after we cut loose. Okay, there's where the thermals are coming from. The sun is heating up the parking lot and the racetrack area, and the air heats up and becomes lighter than the surrounding air, and it breaks off into a bubble and rises. So when we cut loose, we'll go back and find some of those thermals. We're going to make a turn now. We have to be careful not to turn too soon. We'd wind up inside the turn of the tow plane. But if we wait too long, the effect would be like cracking a whip. You'd wind up outside the tow plane turn, and then we'd be pulling his tail around. We're climbing up through 3,000 feet now. You know, every time I fly, I can't help thinking about the thousands of years that man was earthbound, looking up at the birds and wishing he could soar like that. Here we are, we're doing it. But it took a long time for us to get to this point in flying.
The history of early flight chronicles man's passion to fly with stories of courage and adventure and daring achievements. One of those stories is from a 3,000-year-old Greek legend involving a sculptor named Daedalus and his son, Icarus. Now, according to the legend, Daedalus devised a plan to fly himself and his son to freedom from the island where he was exiled, utilizing 2 sets of wings he had fashioned out of large feathers, thread, and wax. Ignoring the advice of his father, Icarus flew too close to the sun, melted the wax on his wings, and plunged into the sea to his death. In 1891, Otto Lilienthal, a German civil engineer, constructed several gliders which demonstrated the advantage of a curved wing surface over one which was flat. After making 2,000 glider flights safely, in 1896 he became another aviation casualty when the wing of his monoplane glider collapsed. Lilienthal's accidental death challenged 2 bicycle makers from Dayton, Ohio, to continue the work of solving aeronautical problems. It was between 1899 and 1902 that Wilbur and Orville Wright made a long series of tests with a primitive wind tunnel, enabling them to assemble a glider which mastered lateral balance and successfully flew over the dunes at Kitty Hawk. Another outstanding pioneer of glider flight was the American Dr. Octave Chanute, who improved upon Lilienthal's ideas when he began designing and building hang gliders in 1896. He became a close friend of the Wright brothers and introduced them to the advantages of a biplane, or a double-wing glider. It appeared that when human flight, the very definition of the impossible, was finally achieved, aviators like the Wright brothers wasted no time in meeting the challenge of developing man-carrying powered aircraft. Gliders have come a long way since those early years. Remember, the space shuttle is a glider when it returns to Earth.
We're at 4,500 feet now and climbing. Just 500 feet to go before we release from the tow plane and go sailing through the air on our own.
Stay tuned to Did You Ever Wonder? As Rex takes us along for a thrilling glider flight, while Professor Hansman explains how a sailplane remains aloft without an engine.
Getting a little dark here. We're under a big old cumulus cloud. And we're coming up on 5,000 feet now, about to release from the tow plane. I'll reach over for the release knob. You see the tow plane pilot wags the rudder, pull the knob, and we cut loose. We're on our own now. Make a gentle bank to the right. Tow plane turns left and heads back to the field. Things are a lot smoother now. Well, our first job is to look for some areas likely to produce thermals. There's the Rockingham racetrack right on our nose. Remember on the tow up we hit some thermal activity over the track. Let's head on over there and we'll see if we can find some lift. You know, when we went to visit Professor Hansman at the MIT Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, we did some experiments related to thermal lift. So what we have here is a little piece of paper that is mounted on this string of monofilament fishing line. And what we're going to do is have this represent our glider. And then we've got the stove down there heating up the air in this stovepipe, and that will represent the column of rising air or a thermal. And so when I take my hand away, by the way, the hand at this point will represent the ground level. Take the hand away and the thermal takes over and our glider rises. John, what are some of the other ways a glider will gain altitude?
Well, in addition to thermal lift, there are two other main sources of lift. One is what we call ridge lift, and what ridge is when air is flowing and hits some sort of an obstacle, and it could be a ridge or a mountain, it has to deflect up to go by the mountain. And in that area where it's deflecting up, if you can fly your glider in that area, you'll actually be lifted by that rising air. The other type of lift is what we call wave lift, and that's very similar to ripples you would see downstream of a rock in a stream. And those ripples have up and down parts, and if you stay in the up part, same thing occurs in the atmosphere. If you stay in the up part, you'll actually get a very strong lift, and the lift can go to very high altitudes, as high as 50,000 feet. And that's the way that the world's record of altitude climb was achieved in a mountain wave in the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Okay. Well, the type of gliding that we're doing today, of course, is thermal gliding, because we don't have the advantage of a ridge or a wave. But once again, the thermal is a column of rising air that you would find over a parking lot, macadam parking lot. You might find it over a sand pit or a gravel pit, or any kind of road or anything that would heat up. Perhaps a plowed field might produce a thermal. And you'd get sink, exactly what's happening here. The sink is created by anything that's green, such as a forest, a stand of trees, or anything that's blue, such as water, maybe a lake or a stream. And when you get that lift in the thermal, that's what you're looking for when you go gliding. We've been circling in this thermal for quite a while now, and we're going to start back to the glider port. It's important to know where you are in relation to the glider port at all times, and always allow yourself enough altitude to get back and land safely. You might say that altitude is a glider pilot's best friend. There's a field off in the distance there. Now we're going to head back and enter a downwind leg. See, we're flying parallel to the runway, the same direction as the wind. Now we make a left turn onto what we call our base leg, which is actually crosswind. And now we turn onto final, and we're into the wind now. Now I pull the spoiler handle. The idea is to drive it right onto the runway. Getting down close now. And we're on. Close the spoilers and we'll let the glider roll off to the side of the runway.
Great show today, Rex. I sure learned a lot about gliding.
You know, there's nothing like it, Mark. Soaring combines the thrill of sailing, skiing, and surfing all in one flight. What are you doing in there?
Yvonne, what are you doing in there?
Just getting ready for next week's show. It's about traveling and living in space.
Traveling and living in space. I can't wait for that show. I mean, after all, I was there.
Come on now. That was all make-believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, it sure was, Rex. And I can't wait to tell our viewers about the real thing.
I'm looking forward to that one myself, but we're just about out of time for today. So for Yvonne, Mark, and myself, we'll see you next time on Did You Ever Wonder?